I was there for unifying of people and just being open and accepting. So it wasn't, about 2 weeks later he called and he said, I just wanted to know if you'd be interested in having a date. Oh my gosh, you know, I just wasn't prepared for that. And I was shocked. I didn't know what to say because no one had ever brought that thought to my mind. And I wasn't really ready to entertain it. I didn't know what to say. And fear rose up. And I just said, yeah, I'm on my way back to Springfield. I'm not staying. I split, you know? And it's interesting. I experienced something in that maybe we all get an opportunity in life somewhere along the way to get a shock opening, and that was one that I was not open because I was trained in a certain environment to think a certain way, to act a certain way, and respond in a certain way. And it was all in the banner of love, but it wasn't very inclusive. And so that began to be a step for me to think about where we're going as a 5,000 member congregation down there, and reaching out into the city to people. We were talking about how we're going to deal with the bathroom situations in the church. You know, and Oral Roberts' group, the folks down there in Tulsa, weren't real happy with us. They didn't even want the bus to come over and pick up people at the university. You know? So this was kind of what opened me up to coming to a reality that it's only been a little over 3 years since I went through the transition. So I had to deal with children, I had to deal with grandchildren, and they were all, I trained them. Oh gosh, be careful what you do with your family. They get stuck in what you tell them if you're not careful. And pretty soon, you know, you have to come back and say, wait a minute, there's another way to look at things. So I had to deal with this, and it took me a long time to think, how do I deal with this? You know, who do I speak to about it? And so, you know, you have to keep these things under wraps until you get some of this stuff figured out, because you've got all these conflicting things in your head going on. And I didn't want to admit myself anything about being what these labels are, because at that point they were foreign to me because of my upbringing. And somebody that was gay, somebody that was transgender, what? You know, this just didn't fit. I didn't like the labels. But I finally began to realize a lot of subtle things in my own life that were there, but they were masked all along. And we all know today that, you know, the whole issue of male and female isn't like this, it's more like this, you know? And so out of that I began to look at some of the things that I was hiding and little things that came along in my life. I was wanting to wear my hair long, but I didn't want to look feminine. And a point came where somebody introduced me to getting my nails taken care of, and that was strange because you just don't do that, you know. But I started moving that way, and little by little, things like that started happening, and I started feeling right about it. Well, you're not supposed to feel that way, but I did. So I thought, what is this all about? What's going on? And little by little, I began to look at my own instincts about what did I really desire, what did I like. I enjoyed our family, I enjoyed raising the children, but the big thing that I found was interesting was that I thought this isn't fair. My wife gets to do all of these bonding experiences with children, and you know, I need to run off and go earn some money and come back and pay for all that. I was operating a recording studio, and I produced hundreds and hundreds of recording albums and this kind of thing here in Springfield, and music was one of my big fortes. So I've usually been on the other side of the glass, or running the camera, or the audio equipment, this kind of thing, rather than being on this side of the camera. So anyway, we'll try this one for a while. I guess if you can transgender, you can also move from the back of the room to the front. And so it was a process of how do I tell my children. And I got to tell you what, those of you that are here in the room are 100 times more friendly than your own family is when it comes to these kind of issues. And so today, well, you know, my oldest daughter and I have a really, really great relationship. She was one of the first ones that had some questions and began to talk about it. And through some of her own issues, we began to share. And so we've been real close. I worked with her in doing a lot of projects for the state here with the Stars and Skis drill team, and they represent the state of Missouri 12 years ago at the inaugural parade in Washington, D.C. And so I got to be a big part of that. And that was before I knew who I really was and where I am today. So today I find myself identifying with female pronouns, she, her, hers, and the word transgender is not so foreign as it was when I first moved into this. I prefer to just be female and be a woman rather than using the name transgender. But I realize that in sharing your experience and being open and authentic with people, this is part of what it's all about, to accept diversity and be diverse. So on December the 21st of 2012, which was the end of the Mayan calendar, that was the last day, that was the last Christmas, that Friday that I had with my family, and I've not been back with most of them since. And I have found a new group of people that is so overwhelmingly accepting. I got to tell you, each one of you guys are my family. Those that have been here in the last year serving as a Bernie Sanders delegate and working with the Democratic Party has been a real joy. And I find that there's a group of people here that have each one a different background, but we're learning to accept one another. So that's my story, and that's what I really want to share about being transgender.
That's actually the first time I've heard JoLynn's full story, and anyway, so I'm going to open up the floor now to questions, and I'm sure some of you have questions. Let's take your question first.
Hi, I will ask, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, or just behind us.
Yolanda.
Okay. I'm from St. Charles County, and we have a pretty good size population of Hispanic Latino people, as I see the children in our schools, but they're not involved with our party at all. And so I'm asking for advice on how and where to reach out to them to get them involved and make them feel welcome.
And I didn't hear that. What, they're not involved in what?
They're not involved with our party organization at all, or our activities, or
Oh, the Democrats?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, keep in mind that we're not in Texas, California, and all those states, you know, certainly Florida, where there have been so many generations, and most of those people there are immigrants. So they are just very busy making a living, you know, and trying to really accommodate themselves to a very different culture, certainly to start with the language barrier, and so they are, and of course raising their families because it's a very young population that we're talking about. Very young people came here, first the males, and then of course got married or whatever. So that's the main issue. Also, because most of these people came here because of economic reasons. We know that with Cubans is because of political reasons. It's also economic, but I don't think give them refugee status, okay? But it's for political reasons. And so, and what happens is that most of them they're not highly educated academically, and so even in their country of origin, they're not that much involved in the political process. And also because so many of them come from a political system in which they think it doesn't make any difference. And you know, they're ones in power and the other ones when they're whatever. So it's so many things, but it's just, it's going to take, you know, of the generations. I'm involved because my family back there is involved, but my story is very different from the average person who comes from Mexico. Mexicans, middle class, and they're wondering if they don't do great. If they're here, it's because of studies or whatever. But so it's so many things. You know, they're new and I mean, they don't get involved in the I don't know, the Democratic Party. Okay, so I mean, they go to their big events and stuff like that. But to get involved politically, I mean, you had to go to them, speak, and say so many things. I had to explain so many things to them. For instance, you know, for the most part, they are Hispanics, and this is in general, not Mexicans, but they are socially conservative, okay? And so, because all the propaganda and what the pastors tell them at church and the priests and so forth, you know, I had to argue with them. Well, I don't like him because, you know, he's nasty or whatever, Trump. But I don't think I want to work for someone who wants to kill babies. You know, abortion. And so, I just went, I don't want to kill babies, you know, you don't have to have abortion if you don't want to. But him, for certainly, he has the power to deport your family. She doesn't have the power to make you have an abortion if you don't want it. So I had to do so many things, you know, and with all those things, it's very hard for them to. Democrats, no, and then the ones who are pro-abortion, this and that, no, you know.
Well,
So, and those are the ones who could, of course, they were citizens, who could vote, of course. If they're not citizens, they cannot vote, so why are they going to join them? They're not part of that. And everybody makes decisions for them about everything. Yeah, about everything. So that's part of that.
Yeah, that
I
helps
mean,
me
I can
understand.
write a book about that, but just to answer your question in 1 minute.
And I will say this, sometimes going to some of those events that you talked about, or festivals or what have you, maybe take a booth at those events and have some handouts or some flyers. You have got to extend the hand of friendship first. And regardless of their immigration status, just being there, even where they're teaching classes, English is a second language, just extending those opportunities to get the information out. And she's right about the church, you know. We get stuck on one issue and that's a dividing factor and it's a done deal.
And that's not true just for Hispanics.
Exactly. But that's,
Yes.
you know, can't get past that.
I go to 3 churches, Catholic, Baptist, and Mormon. So, in the Mormon church, I'm the only Democrat. Even my husband is a Republican. So,
I would just really like to add to what you've said, both of you, because this is about being diverse. And it's not just those of us on the platform that are diverse. We each are diverse in our own ways when we start recognizing past the little issues that we pull up. And I found that, you know, when I started plugging into the community, to this group, that group, another group, through media and doing live streaming, this kind of thing, and really getting involved with the people, every time I take on a new opportunity, yeah, I get a lot busier, but it gives me a whole different worldview of who's out there and what they have to offer to our community, our state, our nation. And I gotta tell you, it's valuable. We miss a lot when we stay at home or when we stay in the little box that was comfortable. And I gotta tell you, the joy that I found in my life is getting into these different places of inclusion and serving, you know? Just recently working with some of the Syrian refugees here in town and seeing what's going on. It's so encouraging to realize what we have to give from our own experience to other people and how much they appreciate it. So I just encourage each of you that are here to open up your heart and your mind and your spirit to being a little bit outside of your comfort zone. Step out somewhere. Go visit with someone that's different or a group that's different. Maybe the last place you would go. That's what it was for me, the last thing on the list, you know? And as we began to reach out to people, when we come united together in our hearts and see past these walls, this is where our power is. This is where unity is. It's easy to talk about unity, it's a unity in the community, but it's another thing to do it. And to do it, you have to be authentic. You have to rise up and be who you are and realize who you are is valuable. It doesn't matter what uniqueness you represent. Each and every one of you in this room, your families and this community, even if it's something that is really, really unique, It's special and it's needed just as much as every puzzle that you put together. Have you ever put a puzzle together and then there was a piece missing? You're the piece that needs to fit in there somewhere. And we need to rise up. And today is the day that we're awakening to a time to rise up and embrace these kind of things we're talking about here. One another in every one of these areas.
JoLynn is very good at pep talks. That is why I love her. I got her a coffee mug once that says "Shine On" because that is her mantra.
I drank my coffee out of it this morning.
Does someone else have a question for the panel? Yes.
As you all mentioned before, there's been a racism has reared its ugly head. There's, of course, always been institutionalized racism and covert racism, but that has also happened. It's unfortunate to report that that's also been happening in the Democratic Party. So my question is, what kind of actions would you suggest to...
Can you be more specific?
Okay. There have been racial slurs, homophobic remarks, sexist remarks at Central Committee meetings in Lafayette County and also here in Greene County. So I'm wondering what kind of action you would suggest to fix those situations, because if this is going to be the party of inclusion and diversity, there should also be actions behind it. Like you were saying, inclusivity is an action. So I believe justice is too. So how do we do that?
Number one, I'm a firm believer in using everything as a teachable moment. Okay. Because that always leaves the door open. When you fight ignorance with ignorance, the door is immediately shut. There is nothing else to discuss because everybody's mind is made up. Does that make sense? I talk on a lot of panels. I never will forget, I spoke at Drury University a couple of years ago to an older retiree group, and it was on diversity. That's a new catchphrase in the 2000s, I guess. And as I left, I was talking about terms that were acceptable way back then, but are not acceptable in the current day and age. And they had no clue they were being offensive. You see what I'm saying? So you have to use things like that as a teachable moment. For instance, I worked at city utilities. I work with all men. They're all from the surrounding communities around here. They're electricians. I was not only the only female in the building, I was the only person of color in the building. And I was talking to one of my supervisors one day, and we were talking about American Idol. And he says, that colored girl, she really did a great job. You know, he's in his early 40s, he's a supervisor, and he did not have a clue how offended I was. So since I like him, I didn't bite his head off. I went back to my desk and I thought about it, and it bothered me. 3 days later, I went back to him again, and I told him, I says, you know, and he has 3 children, mind you. And I told him, I says, you know what, the other day when we were talking, you were talking about the girl who did such a good job. I said, and you called her that colored girl. Do you remember that? And he's like, yeah. I said, that is a very offensive term. And his eyes got about this big. He did not have a clue that was offensive. He didn't. He had heard that all his life. He came from a farm in Kansas. He had heard it all his life. And it was just how it was. Those colored people. So I explained to him how that was very offensive to me, why it was not a term that should be used anymore, and it had outlived its usefulness. So he never ever said it again. I watched him catch himself a couple of times in discussions, but he never ever said it again. And I don't believe he was a racist. That's just how he was brought up, as that term, you know. So you have to use those kind of things as teachable moments. If something offends you, you need to say right then, you know, that term offends me, and explain why it offends you. You know, I worked with a girl who had the habit of calling me gal and girl, you know, and I don't think hers was ignorance. I think that hers was just a little passive aggression. But again, I'm like, sweetie, don't call me girl. Don't call me gal. I'm nobody's girl or gal. I've got kids older than you, so don't do that. So she didn't do that anymore either. You see what I'm saying? But you have to, if we continue to take offense at what everybody says and does, then we shut it down. Nothing gets accomplished. It's going to be a chaotic, hot mess. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I understand what you're saying. I'm biracial.
Okay.
I have white family and black family.
Okay.
And so I've encountered that with my own grandma who loves
Right.
me. So I understand that. And I've been called boy before and have confronted it
Okay.
based on just like you said. You said that's unacceptable. But there was another situation where I was called the N-word, which is not a generational gap. I mean, so there is overt racism, and then what you are describing, I believe, is different. So how do you think that we should handle instances like that?
I think it's the same either way. You know, I do. Because the N-word to me it's another word that has outlived its usefulness, very much so. But within the black or the African American culture, they throw it around like it's a nickname. You know what I'm saying? So, and that comes from them not knowing their history. Because if anybody knew their history, they wouldn't call their buddy and their pal the N-word. And and then they want to do a twist on words, nigger, nigga, or, you know, excuse me, it all means the same. When they were hanging from a tree, it all meant the same thing. So to me, that is just ignorance. And you can't talk to ignorant people. Duh. Why waste your breath and your airspace? Does that make sense to me? I step away from ignorance because I can get down low and dirty with the best